Very good. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will begin the Economic Development and Incentive Committee. Let me read this again. Economic and Development Incentive Committee. Somebody wasn't sure if we were still called the Tax Exempt Review Committee, so we have to make a little extra effort for that. We have a quorum, so we'll begin our meeting. We have several items on the agenda. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It is number one, approve the EDIC meeting minutes of the 3/26/24 meeting. And we have the minutes in front of us. If there are any changes or corrections, otherwise we would accept a motion.
Move to approve.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other comments or changes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Number two, continuation of the Commonwealth NEX Senior Housing Project Pilot. Jim Gilmore to get us started. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. I also want to thank John and Lucas for taking some time to get on a call with North Dakota Housing Finance and talk about the project along with Tyler Sharon from Commonwealth. We have all of them online. What I think would be best is to hear first from North Dakota Housing Finance. They're the ones that evaluate who gets tax credits and whether or not they qualify and are the soft costs appropriate. And so maybe I'll just start with them. Jennifer Henderson and Joe Fink with North Dakota Housing Finance. Do you want to introduce yourselves and just kind of give our committee an overview of particularly the soft costs that are involved with developing a low-income housing project and how this one would compare with other projects that you've seen. Jennifer and Joe?
Sure, I can start. My name is Jennifer Henderson. I am the Director of the Planning and Housing Development Division at North Dakota Housing Finance Agency, and we are the allocators of the state's low-income housing tax credit annual allocation. Through that process, we have to develop an allocation plan which identifies how we are going to rank, score, and select applications for each of the funding rounds. Joe Fink in our office is a development officer, and he is responsible for reviewing those applications and ranking and scoring them. So with that, this particular project, Next Senior, did receive an allocation of credits. The application was reviewed, ranked, and scored, and it met all of the requirements and criteria outlined in our published allocation plan. Joe, did you want to add anything else at this time?
No, go right ahead.
So if you don't mind, I'll just jump in, Jim. Just as a refresher, we had some questions from our group about the prices and costs and things like that. And I think that was the main reason, if that's correct, that there were some people that wanted to have a kind of a refresher of that. So Jim, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
I mean, I think when we looked at the hard costs, it was, the actual construction costs, it was very similar to what our housing authority is paying at Lashkowitz. What's different about these projects is that in a private apartment project, the whole engineering soft costs, might be only half or even less of what we see with these particular projects. And, John and Lucas and I went over those costs with Tyler and talked about them a little bit with Housing Finance. And I guess we kind of went line by line, and we could do that again. But all in all, there are just many extra costs that are present when you're doing a low-income housing project versus a private project that doesn't have all the federal oversight and review, syndication of tax credits, all the legal and financing costs that they face. Mayor?
So, excuse me, Chair. You would say that this is typical of a low-income project. They say this is typical. We're not hitting anything different. That was just one concern that I thought I'd get a lot of more bang for my buck in the private sector. But this just tells us because, like many things, the financial structure and costs are a little bit different for these types of things. So they are in what the market normally would show us.
Maybe I could have Jennifer answer that question. She was nodding her head, but I'd like to get confirmation from the state.
Yes, that's accurate. It is within line with other affordable housing applications.
Yeah, I think, Jennifer, what we were looking at is cost per apartment, and that was the difficulty we were having because we have some developers in the room that said they could build it a lot cheaper. So what you're saying, it's just the way this is structured and what they have to do federal requirement wise. Oftentimes, it will come out. If I just purely say these are 40 apartments, here's what it costs. Finance costs are a big part of that are different than I'd do if I did an open market.
Yes, this particular project is financed with some HUD dollars, some federal dollars as well, which requires some federal cost-cutting regulatory requirements such as Davis-Bacon and Section 3, which adds to administrative costs of a project. Also, the contractors that are willing to work on these types of projects have additional administrative burden by tracking, for example, those specific regulatory requirements. It's not comparing apples to apples.
And then you would say this is an important thing for our community because the vacancy rate sits in our community right now. It's a very important project for the city of Fargo.
I think when
The
we
senior housing project is priority.
Thank you.
When you look at the growing number of seniors in Fargo and the long waiting list for senior housing, clearly this is needed. We could probably use a couple of these every year for the next 5 years.
Any other questions?
Well, in honor of John Cosgrove, I move to approve.
Go ahead.
I'm looking to move in.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I think I would love to hear. I mean, Jennifer and Joe, if you guys have a little bit more to add, or if you had prepared some more information. The concern that I have personally, especially when we're looking at the cost for development for this project versus a cost to development of just a market rate project, is it's nearly double. So I've talked to 3 different developers in our city. They have said that they can build this anywhere from $200,000 to $225,000 per door. This project, with all costs included, are looking at about $390,000 per door, and that's for a low-income project. And so I absolutely recognize that the federal requirements are going to add additional costs. I recognize that this is finding different types of tenants for this might be more difficult. What I don't understand is how it can be 2x the amount. And so if there is a way, that's what I'm trying to get a better understanding of. Because as you look through the finances on this project, you see things like $350,000 for architectural drawings and architecture on a 40-unit apartment building. And I don't really know if it's my role to dig this deeply into this, everybody, but I look at this as how is it that our private developers can be building these same types of projects for $200,000 to $225,000 a door, and then there's an out-of-state developer coming in, which is fantastic. We need this project, and I want to support it. That's going to be nearly double that cost. And so that's my open question. And the meeting with Tyler and Joe and Jennifer was exceptional. What it taught me was that this is extremely complex. But I have yet to understand how that difference is built out for just saying it's a federal project, I guess. So there's I have open questions.
I think that it's a complex project, and that's one of the reasons we don't have that many local developers trying to do this.
Sure.
I noticed one of the things that was higher than usual, in a private sector project was I think the development fee was like at 15%. But, that's offset by the fact when you look at the cash flow of this project over the next 30 years, there's not much, positive cash flow. And so they tend to be making their money up front because they're going to have to carry this for 30 years and have a relatively low rate of return on they go out. So.
Yeah, and again, I think this definitely points to an opportunity for us to look into how we're doing the underwriting of the deals that we review. I think that right now it is robust, but how do we add? I think what I would like to see for this project in particular would be if we have, what are the past 3 approved projects similar to this, 55 plus low income housing, and a breakdown of those costs. Jim, I know you shared some with me, maybe one with me prior, and just to see. Because if they're $390,000 a door, or even let's say 2x what the market rate for building these would be, then I guess this makes sense. And we need this product in our community. But if they're less than that, I wonder what the difference is there.
Yeah, I don't know if Jennifer, if do these costs, are they much different than like the Milton Earl project that Beyond Shelter did, or the the Prairie one that was done by Mountain Plains and, Lashkowitz. I know all of those had probably higher than normal soft costs.
I will let Joe chime in here, but I know we've seen some increase in costs over the last 3 years based on just inflation and other reasons, but it's comparable. They're all comparable. Joe, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, there are comparable. We've seen a trending up in costs, and that's both hard and soft costs within the last few years. No one likes to see soft costs increase. It doesn't seem to provide a lot of value, but we do also have some pretty stringent requirements on the type of funding that is going into the project. It is public funds, and we do have a responsibility to provide as much housing to the public that are at most at risk. You tend to see affordable housing projects run higher costs because of some of that. A lot of the architectural or some of the architectural and engineering costs can be attributed to things like the requirements we have for green building, the inclusion of our universal design requirements, which is pretty extensive. If you look through our application materials, I'm sure Tyler would shake his head as well, that that's a lot. Those are things that private developers typically don't need to worry about. However, they're there to make sure that we're the best stewards of the public funds.
Any other comments or questions? I would jump in real quick and say that's just the way it is. And it's unfortunate, and it should be the opposite. It should be easier to build low-income housing, but it's the regulations and the requirements. It's just a lot more stringent because you're using public dollars, and so it's like Jim said, we could build multiple buildings and have them full for senior housing. We have the demand, and so it's kind of unfortunate that it seems like we're making it more difficult to build that type of housing. And it's costing us more. That's kind of the opposite of what we would hope would happen. So
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I look at this budget and I see there's a lot of things in there that don't, to be frank, don't make a lot of sense to me. And so it feels bloated. That being said, I think we only have a couple options, right? Our job here is to make sure that the city tax dollars are being put to use in the most effective way possible. And so we approve this with the $390,000 per door, and we have a product that our community desperately needs. That makes sense to me. There's another option where we say, hey, this is inflated, and this isn't necessarily something that's going to be very responsible for us to put towards, because this obviously is far too high of a building cost, and something's not right here. That's also not good for the community. The thing doesn't get built. What I'm curious about is, how do we find a middle ground to say, what is the, let's say, cost plus on a normal market rate for a building like this, and then some consideration for the fact that it is a federal project. And the only way that I would know to do that would be using comps of past projects that are in our community. So that's what I've been wrestling with as we've gone through here. So I'd love thoughts. I don't mean to.
no, but the flip side of that is, I mean, we can become more involved in talking to the federal government and the state about what they're doing and how it's affecting us here. I mean, that's because part of this, it's above our pay grade. I mean, it's the city commission. So go ahead, Mayor.
Well, I think if the state approved it, it's a very competitive market. We really need senior housing. So I have a better understanding. It's a lot of different things that come in because there's a federal project putting federal money in it as well. So again, I would move to approve.
Do I have a second? If we're ready for that, and we can still have further discussion.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Go ahead.
And I would just make the comment that it happens across all municipal and tax supported projects, is that there's additional layers of bureaucracy and reviews, and it's frustrating when you look and you see the private sector developers that can come in and accomplish something very quickly. There are different layers that get on top of this, and there's $2 to $3 million of regulatory requirements that you hate to say it, because you're trying to incent it with taxes, and on the other side, regulations are forcing the cost up. And so, Levi, I think you've got a good point. And we do need to push back to those requirements and say, you know, it's very easy to sit in a committee or something and say, we want green requirements and there's no cost to that. We just put them in. Well, here's where the rubber meets the road, and you have to start dealing with that. So, but again, senior housing is something we have to address. So, I don't like our position either, but I think we go ahead with it.
I mean, going forward, if we could find other developers who could, apply to the state and do it at a lower cost, that would be great. But it's hard to find people willing to dive into this market. Some of the low-income housing or some of the nonprofits have done that, but when we look at if we take a hard look at their costs too, they're, I think, paying about the same rates for all of this. So.
Very good. Any other discussion? Otherwise, if we're ready, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Motion carries. Very good. We'll move on to number 3, a request for a 1-year extension for the Kmart TIF project. Jim will get us started with that.
Yeah, Austin Morris is here. Austin, if you want to come up to the other podium. This project had a completion date of the end of 2024. The minimum improvements required were 20,000 square feet of commercial space. They do have a 30,000 square foot shell up, and so they've over-delivered on that commercial space. They're also required to build 2 kind of standalone commercial sites out front. Neither of those have started. Austin indicates he expects one to begin this year, maybe the other, but he'd really like another year to kind of complete the project so they can get the value up to what was anticipated. Well, Austin, I don't know if you want to give us an update on the project. I know today's market, it's tough to get construction done.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Austin Morris of Enclave. So general update on the project, we're happy with how it turned out. It really changes the entire neighborhood and offers a new amenity set there. As you can see, Beyond Shelter behind us that we worked with to get that project off the ground is going guns blazing, so that's awesome. The retail center is complete. As Jim said, we have 3 pad site opportunities. We have 1 under contract, another in letter of intent stage, and then the furthest south pad just to the west of the car wash will be our only open pad. So really just asking for this extension is to ensure we're compliant from a TIF perspective, make sure that we accomplish what we set out to accomplish.
Very good. Any questions? From my perspective, it looks great. So I drive by there almost every day, and compared to what it was, it's a great thing. So thank you for what you've done. And obviously the market conditions are a little more challenging than we would like it. But can I just ask you, from the perspective of building, our costs either leveling out, or can you give us a bit of an update on that?
I would say costs have leveled out, but we haven't seen in a big way cost savings. From an inflationary perspective, they probably plateaued, but I wish I could say that we could build the same thing for a little bit less this year at 7.5–8% interest. But yeah, the retail side of things, as you've noticed, is slower than we'd like. We've encountered that the last 12 months, but we're looking forward to spring, summer, fall leasing season because it's way better than dead of winter. And we did finish this last fall, so we didn't finish it to really fully take advantage of the leasing season.
Very good. Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Maybe just one other comment is that as part of this overall redevelopment, they sold this site to Beyond Shelter, and there's a senior low-income housing project that's going up on this site right now.
And just to add on that, this is a good example. So Beyond Shelter, the original project was going to be the whole section, and then because of fluctuations and approvals and things like that, the project isn't quite as big. And that just happens sometimes. Could you talk a little bit about that, Jim? Yeah,
they just ran into some environmental things where I think they got too far ahead of themselves, and then they weren't qualifying for those low-income housing tax credits and had to restructure their financing and only build about half of what was originally proposed.
Right. Any other questions? Otherwise, go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Well, I'm concerned where all the car clubs went because they used to be in the Kmart parking lot now, so you don't have those anymore, but would move to approve the extension.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any other comments or corrections or jokes or anything? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, number 4, request from JS2L for redevelopment of the block northeast of 4th Street and 6th Avenue. Jim Gilmore.
At one of your previous meetings, you had approved the policy that allowed people to apply for these kind of early TIF where you could take down the buildings here. I'm trying to get a map up here. Anyway, this isn't showing up very well. This is the SARS building, but maybe John and Stephen, if you want to come to the podium to talk about this site and your plans, but the request would be to pay for the costs of removing the buildings around the block. This is a summary of the addresses. So what you have now on the block is land that's worth 600,000, improvements that would be worth $1 million. And so under this new policy, they could receive a TIF for the value of those improvements that they're demolishing, as well as the cost of the actual demolition. This would all be contingent on them starting a new project in 5 years, and they would only be repaid if there is in fact new development and that would pay off those improvements. Stephen, you want to talk about your timeline in terms of what you'd like?
Yeah, we don't have a, real set plan. We just, like we talked about, like to get rid of the eyesore and police, fire over there all the time. And it would give us, a nice canvas to start from versus just kind of guessing. So
So Jim, can I ask you a question? So the cost of taking down the buildings, is that in the improvements or how
No,
will that work?
the improvements, that's what the city assessor has for the value of the buildings right now. And so normally we do land write down plus demolition. Rather than do land write down, this is probably a little less because this is what the city assessor feels these buildings are worth. So if they went out and sold these, they could, probably get $1 million, get their 1.6 million back. But because they're going to take those down, then this is sort of the loss of an asset because they're demolishing it as well as the cost of the demolition.
So let me
Long
just,
term, the city would recover all of that as a new development comes in.
so let me just ask, so then basically then the improvements, which is the second column over where it's a little over $1 million. So then whatever it costs them to take down the buildings that's a separate number? How will, so then
Yeah,
that-
so the TIF note would be the 1 million improvements plus, let's say it's 500,000 to tear down the block.
Okay.
So it would be 1.5 million. I don't know, Stephen, if you have an estimate.
yeah, that's in the
Okay.
ballpark.
Okay, so then, and I apologize for asking dumb questions, but then, so then the total amount that they'll be eligible for is the improvements, then plus the cost of demolition, correct?
Yes. And over that 5-year period, they may not get all that back, but that's the maximum they would be able to get back.
Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead, Mayor.
When are you anticipating taking it all down?
Sooner rather than later would be great for
Like
us.
sometime this summer, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good, because that'd be nice to have done for the firemen and everybody else. You have that summertime crowd not.
We have the SWAT team using it right
For
now.
clean,
to
for
test,
cleanup week, you cannot leave this all on the boulevard for cleanup week, correct? No, but I just think that's good to know that the number that, because I do think this is the first time we've done this, and so I wanted you to know what your expectations are, and then, so then they have 5 years from the.
Yeah,
ahead.
so ideally, we'll get this to city commission at your last meeting in May. I believe that's the 29th. And so from the time that next contract is signed, they'd have they actually have a shorter period of time. I think it's a year to get all the buildings down, but then they have 5 years to start on a new building.
Go ahead, John.
Thanks for coming in, Stephen. I think it's I think this is great in terms of taking down blighted buildings. I know the mayor, Commissioner Pepcorn had mentioned too, the fire and police having to constantly be out there to check on the buildings, on things that probably shouldn't be happening in the city. But hopefully this is a model, and hopefully we start to get further developers coming in and saying, hey, look at, if we're able to take down blighted buildings, it could be a great way to start spurring further development. So I think this is great.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? And we have had this issue in other parts of the city, and so this is kind of our way to tackle it, and I think it's a good setup. So go ahead, Mayor.
And Stephen, the only thing I would have is this policy does help you guys to be stimulated to do this, right? If we didn't have the policy, it's not cost effective for you to do this. You'd take it down and kind of wait, but it helps you recoup your cost to build something else.
That's correct.
Okay.
And so, yeah, real quick, are all of the buildings on this list going to be demolished this summer, or is it a subsection of it?
Yep.
Oh, so every one of them? Great, got it.
Very good. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
I've been doing this all day.
good.
Second.
Come on, Lucas, you gotta be part of this.
Motion and a second. Any other further discussion?
John and I can't carry the whole.
I hear that. I recognize that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Number 5, a TIF summary. Jim Gilmore.
I'm gonna actually have Mike's gonna lead this one. He put together some real interesting information.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. So this is a project that I put together here in the last couple of weeks as part of a request from the county. One of the commissioners over there wanted to see what the TIF projects have looked like over the years, what their base value was at the start, and then when they expired, what was the overall increase. And so as you can see, instead of just doing the ones that had expired, I did everything that we have in our system right now, and broke it down by, if you look at the base true and full value at the beginning, that basically is the amount that we have to put at the beginning of the TIF project, and it's we have to set it at the lowest value possible so that it basically starts as low as it can, and it can get those increments growing as quickly as possible over the time. And then the true and full value at expiry, that's basically what the assessor's office has put the value at that time that the TIF expired. The second value there, the net taxable value at expiry, is what the values were if there was any properties that had exemptions on them at the time that the TIF expired, then that's why there would be that difference of value there. Now, it could be that at this time, like if I looked at those properties that had exemptions on them at the time that the TIF expired, those could now be expired at this time, but at the time of expiry, there was some that had exemptions on them. And then what I did was I went and looked at how many of the years were in the fund and broke it out by that first duration value change. That's the percentage of change over the total time that it was in the TIF itself. And then I broke it out by the years, appreciation per year on the bottom. Now, this is not really, deep math. So don't ask me any real deep math about compound interest and all that kind of stuff, because I will not be able to tell you the answer, but any general observations or questions I can try.
Well, thank you much for, this is so impressive, Mike, so thank you for doing that. I just think it's so interesting, and it might take us a while to digest this because it's just fascinating. Go ahead, Mayor.
Well, the public can't see these because it's kind of tiny print and you don't have it up on a headboard, but if you did the quote total of it, what would be the beginning value and quote end value, and then you put a percentage, what in your estimate, Mike, would be the percentage?
For the total?
Total for all our tests.
I cannot answer that question. It would take me a while. It would take me a little bit to put that together, and I could get that.
Well, for every one of them, it's a huge amount of increased value on all of them, you know.
Right. I think suffice it to say that the lowest increase per year, I think, is 16%. Is that correct?
Yep.
You know, and it goes up from there as high as 5,000% per year increase.
So Mike, can I ask you for a favor? At our city commission meeting, could you have this so we could put this up and it could be on the information so people can see it? Because and then also available, if you don't mind doing that. But
Sure.
so like you said, one of them is 5,000%. So it's just,
Well, that's what I'm saying, Commissioner, is, and you oftentimes said, I think our TIF things start at 10 million and they end up 350 million or something like that. It's a 30-to-1 return on investments in a sense. But the secondary part of that is how much taxes you get, right? So if we started at 10 million, whatever your tax value is, and you're up to 360 million, what's your tax value? I think that'd be important for the commissioners. And you, Dave, you sometimes talk about that, but that's the only reason. If you look at all these, it's 5,000, 4,000, 3,000 net increase in value. And I think we always talk about that, you know, do TIFs pay off for the city of Fargo? Yeah, they do. And we've done very well with all the different investors that have done it.
the other thing I wanted to add, so it would be tempting to just, everybody that comes in, say yes. But the one thing I think we've done a good job of is we are fairly conservative, that we do not have a lot of new ones, and we have several dropping off, and so we kind of try to keep that pace. Because to me, if you start looking at 5,000% return on investment, I would start saying, man, why aren't we, everybody that walks in the door, why don't we slap them on the back and tell them good luck? But I think we have pretty good discipline because anyway, I don't know if you, go ahead, John.
I was going to say, if at all possible, I know that some of these are active and some of these are completed at this point. My question or comment would be I think it'd be really interesting if you could try to work in how much they're paying in property taxes today versus what you would have estimated as if it's a percentage or what it is. Basically what I want to see is if they would have never done anything, and let's just hypothetically say it's $20,000 a year in annual property taxes, and because the committee approved something and they built a project, now we're collecting $750,000, whatever the numbers are, right? Just total hypotheticals. Because I think the percentages are very helpful. I mean, I wish my investment portfolio looked like this. But I think the dollar amounts would speak more to people in terms of like, this is how much the city now is capturing in property taxes. And had we not done anything, this is an estimate of what the city would be capturing in property taxes.
I certainly can do it as of today if you wish. One question of point of clarification is, would you want it as of the expiry date of the TIF itself or current, you know, because there's other things that come into.
I think some of them you're not going to be able to do it because it's still active. And so I think on some of them that are completed, I think those are the ones that I might focus on.
So just again, as of today,
Yeah.
don't worry
As of
about the
today.
expiration
Yeah,
date.
because it's not going to be perfect because
Right.
they're hypotheticals of what you may be collecting versus what you're currently collecting. And so I would just try to do it just because people tend to look at dollars versus, I mean, once you start getting to 357%, I mean, that's insane.
Sure.
You can't even put a number on that dollar wise.
Then the other thing I'm going to do, maybe throw up a little bit of a concern about is to put down this is what it would have if we hadn't done it, which is
Yep, it's gonna be
basically
hypothetical.
unprovable.
Yep,
So I'm not going
it's
to try and put a
hypothetical.
number down on that because,
Okay.
I'm not going to hang
fine.
myself out to dry on that.
Sure.
But wouldn't that kind of be the base value at the beginning? I mean, if we're saying that nothing's going to be done if we don't approve this, the project's not viable, so whatever we're getting in taxes at the point of approval would be that opportunity cost?
I could put that in as a theoretical.
Yeah.
If nothing had changed, because the thing about it is if you look at the market over time, in general, I think in my annual report I had something that said the true and full value has changed roughly 7% over the last per year over the last 20, 30 years, something along those lines. So depending on these very old TIFs projects, you're going to see that even if it was worth 2 million at the time of the
Yep.
base was taken, and we would say nothing changed, whatever, it would have probably increased 7% over that time.
Yep.
You know, per year. So,
And also, but that consideration and also inflation consideration would be interesting. You know, if it's 30 years of inflation, that dollar is going to be different than the dollar 30 years prior.
yeah, I'm not sure how that you would write inflation into real estate prices like that, though, because inflation only, you know, I mean, even though eventually it does affect the real estate market, it affects other things quicker and larger.
Sure.
You know, so I'm not sure how I would be able to do that other than just saying in general, this is what the market
Sure.
is doing.
Yeah. I'm not trying to do trigonometry, just asking questions.
You're good.
Right.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Well, but when our Board of Equalization met, you had a 5% increase of real estate property over the last 20 years. So we've almost a pretty basic 5% growth we've had over the time. So, I mean, you could factor that in that. But to John's point, I like the idea of just apples to oranges. Here's what the value is. Here's what it was. And it's to the public, that's what they want to see. And we can put all the different factors in there to break it down. But I think the end point, it's pretty impressive.
Yep, exactly. And to the mayor's point, I mean, percentages are certainly helpful. Percentages and dollar amounts are typically what, you know, finance people work in, but I think the dollar amount's just as important. And, you know, there's going to be some things that you're just going to have to notate, you know, to the best of the ability, and just footnote what you're attempting to do and just explain it.
Sure.
Very good. Thank you. This is great discussion. Thank you for doing this, Mike. This is great information. And so we just received it today, so it'll take us a while to digest it. But I would appreciate it if we could start at the city commission meetings as well, because it would just be good for everyone to have that information. So thank you for doing it.
And Mr. Chairman, I would just comment that if you look back, the one thing that I heard a lot of is that TIFs never end. And if you look, the TIFs approved in the 80s and 90s tended to get stretched out because we continued to add into those TIFs. And I would say this group's gotten much better discipline in keeping the TIFs performing in shorter periods. So you can go back and blame those former commissioners for not doing a very good job. That would be me. Not back to the 80s, so.
But I would agree that that was what I was talking about. They are expiring, and we haven't been adding many, you know, we don't add multiple new ones when one drops off. And I do think that, but there were reasons behind some of those back in the day that were extended. So I think but I'm glad you said it instead of us, so.
Yeah.
Very good. Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, that's everything on our agenda. Thank everybody for coming, and we are adjourned. Have a good afternoon.